Hello everybody and welcome to another Top 10 World of Warcraft video. My name is Jacob with Tunnel Vision Gaming, and today I have for you the top 10 raids of all time. Now this list will be made up entirely of my own opinion, but once I start getting more subscribers and regular viewers to my channel, I would like to open up these top 10 videos to the public so that people can vote on them and have their own opinions heard in the video. So be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel, but also please spread the word about Tunnel Vision Gaming because I really want to start getting into making gaming videos for you guys every single week on YouTube. I'm going to need all the support I can get to do that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on our list. First up on our list of the top 10 raids in World of Warcraft is also the first ever raid put in the game, and that's Onyxia Slayer. Often forgotten about as it's the oldest raid in the game, but also because it's a one boss only raid. This raid was a vanilla raid, and as most of you know, vanilla was not a smooth time for raiding, especially at the start. Since this was the first raid boss anyone had encountered, they had not seen much in the way of mechanics with the precursor 5-man dungeons they'd been in before, so while by today's standards this boss seems pretty easy, back then it was considered pretty difficult. For one, she was completely taunt immune, so if a DPS was to pull aggro, which was very easy back then, she would turn towards them and cast Flame Breath, instantly killing most of your raid. In the second phase, she would fly into the air and occasionally cast Deep Breath while flying across the room, spreading the floor below her and killing anyone in her path. While this may sound pretty easy to deal with, back in the day it was considered a lot to handle, and that's why this raid has found its way to number 10 on our list. Up next at number 9 on our list, we move from the first ever raid to be released to the most recent raid to be released, and that is the Hellfire Citadel. Now I did almost put the Siege of Orgrimmar here, but as I unsubbed during the Mists of Pandaria, I decided to go with the Hellfire Citadel since this is the one that I've actually played. This 13 boss raid brings back Archimonde for the first time since the Battle for Mount Hyjal raid in the Burning Crusade, where people farmed him for nearly a year waiting for the Sanwal Plateau to be released. As compared to this version of Archimonde, the people have been farming for over a year waiting for the new Legion expansion to be released. This raid does have several filler bosses like Kilrogg Deadeye, Fellord Zakuun, and Tyrant Velhari, but it also has several challenging and some of the most interesting bosses to be released in the entire Warlords Draenor expansion like Mythic Gorefiend, Mannoroth, Zul'Farrak, and of course Archimonde. Archimonde himself claims the title, being the first boss since Alakir in the Cataclysm to live past his second raid lockout after first being pulled by Method. Even though your tanks get to run around in a giant robot on Sakathar and your entire raid gets to play Hot Potato on Iskar, his raid does still only find itself at number 9 on our list. At number 8, we have another boss making their triumphant return to stardom as Ragnaros appears once again in the Firelands. This second raid tier of Cataclysm was easily the best raid of the entire expansion, and it was carried big time by the Ragnaros encounter. First off, as soon as you walk into the raid, you realize the entire place up until Major Domo was just a molten core with the Sky Dome. While Betelek was pretty difficult for some guilds, each of the other bosses leading up to Ragnaros were extremely easy and didn't pose much of a challenge at all. While Rylith and Lilith Razor introduced some new and innovating mechanics, allowing people to fly through rings Sonic style and allowing players to actually steer the boss around by attacking his legs, none of them really lived up to the hype that the Firelands was bringing. But then it happened. You made it to Ragnaros, and god what a fight that was. Phase 1 was boring, sure, just like any other boss in WoW, but the phase transitions were always exciting and one misstep from causing a wipe. Phase 2 had the dance mechanics that I always love to see in raids, and Phase 3 has you kiting giant meteors all over the place. Now if you were on Heroic, you got an extra Phase 4. Ragnaros emerges, like he does on normal, only now Cenarius and his gang show up and freeze his hot tub, and oh my god, Ragnaros has legs? Who would have thought? Ragnaros actually gets up out of his pool and can now be tanked across the room on 2 giant fiery legs. With fire everywhere, meteors flying, and Raggy's sweet, sweet legs, this is all more than enough to land the Firelands at number 8 on our list. Number 7 brings the first of many Burning Crusade raids on our list, and that is the Tempest Keep. TK featured Kel'Thas Sunstrider making his first World of Warcraft appearance since he first appeared in the original Warcraft series, and it's still considered one of the greatest boss fights ever in the game. It's only number 7 though because the other bosses in the raid were completely lacking. Loot Reaver, as it was called, was on farm before the first kill, and once they fixed Astromancer, that fight turned into one of the easier bosses in BC. Awar was a ramp up and challenge from the other 2 bosses, sure, but nothing compared to Kel'Thas. Kel'Thas was a 5-phase fight and had several things wrong with it when it first launched. With the first 2 phases just having you set up for the final 3 phases, only the final 3 phases were completely broken, making the fight unkillable for some time. Once the fight was patched enough, it was clear that this fight would help shape raiding for the foreseeable future though. This was the first and only time that during the middle of a fight you could loot things you killed and equip legendary items off of them. Also, this is the first fight to ever see a destructible environment when Kel'Thas destroys the wall behind him heading into Phase 5. While by today's standards that animation looks pretty weak, back in the day it took everyone's breath away. Also, it'd probably be wrong of me not to mention the Ashes of Awar mount. This one mount has ensured that the entire raid is ran weekly to this very day. Personally, I ran it all the way from Wrath of the Lich King until the spring of 2016 when the mount finally dropped for me, and now I don't even use it. As great as the Kel'Thas fight is, just like the Firelands, one boss clearly can't push you into the top 5 of our list. At number 6, we had the BC raid that, as it turns out, we were all prepared for, and that is the Black Temple. Back in a time when you couldn't just ding to max level, do a few things in Tanan, and be raid ready for HFC, Black Temple was not even seen by a lot of the WoW player base. First, you had to head back to the Eastern Kingdoms and clear Karazhan, then Grol's Lair, Magtheridon's Lair, head over to the swamps of Zangarmarsh and cut off the head of Lady Vash, which gave you entrance to the Tempest Keep, where you would spend a few months on the completely broken fight that was Kel'Thas Sunstrider. But now you've done it, Kel'Thas and Lady Vash are dead, and you can finally head into the place that the entire expansion from the moment you touched down in Hellfire Peninsula was building to, the Black Temple. And what you're met with was pure disappointment. Agentis, 2 pulls and he's dead. Supremus dead without even an explanation. Shade of Akama, the only threat to you wiping on Akama was if one of your DPS started the encounter before all the trash was dead. A guild that killed Kel'Thas Sunstrider, a 5-phase fight in a world where most bosses didn't even have a second phase, couldn't wipe on Supremus if they friggin' tried. Now, to be fair, after the first 3 bosses, you were met with a challenge at every boss on, starting with Terran Gorefiend, and to this very day, the Reliquary of Souls is still known as the Guild Breaker because of its huge gear and skill requirements to kill. Mother Shiraz and the Illidari Council are dead, and now you only have one man left to kill, the moment you've been waiting for months, Illidan Stormrage. I don't know a single person who didn't get chills when he first uttered those iconic words,
"You are not prepared."
The fight itself is still one of the best fights ever put in the game for its time, with certain abilities of Illidan still in the game today like Metamorphosis. I debated heavily whether or not to put the Tempest Keep ahead of this one, but I decided on the Black Temple because of just how great of a character Illidan Stormrage is. I am personally more excited to see him back in Legion than any other thing this upcoming expansion is bringing. However, there are still 5 more raids to go ahead of this one. Number 5 brings us the Sanwal Plateau, and this raid was a long time coming. People have been farming the Black Temple and the Battle for Mount Hajjal for almost a year waiting for a new content patch to launch, and patch 2.4 finally came. With it, it brought a ton of new content, like the daily hub on the Onyxia, Magister's Terrace, and of course Sanwal Plateau, the most difficult raid ever put into the game. Back then, there were no normal and heroic modes, there was only one mode, which was basically the equivalent of what Mythic was today. Only in the Sunwell, after the first 2 bosses, every single boss was as difficult, if not more difficult, than a boss like Mythic Manaroth and Mythic Archimonde are today. So long as your raid was properly geared and skilled, Kael'thas and Brutalis didn't pose much of a problem, but as soon as you got to Felmist is when most guilds hit the wall and progression came to a screeching halt. After that, you moved on to the Eridar twins, where the famous myth they used the lamppost still goes strong. The myth goes that the world first guild to kill the boss, Nilium, had their entire 25-man raid stand on a lamppost in the room, and the boss's abilities wouldn't hit them. But with kill videos and guilds trying to repeat the act unsuccessfully, that proved to only be a myth. Next up was Meru, a boss which is considered to be the most difficult boss ever put in the game by most players. Not to be mistaken with the most fun boss, as it's nowhere close to that. A simple ad fight that had an insane DPS and healing requirement where if you fell behind on ads for a mere second or 2, it was a guaranteed wipe. This boss is also the only time in the history of World of Warcraft that mages were benched and forced to sit outside the raid for their warlock and shaman brethren. Lastly, you had Kill Jaden, and with the bosses before being so difficult, almost the entire WoW player base didn't see him, let alone kill him, making him the least killed boss in the history of WoW before future content was released. You had to have players turn into dragons, mirror images were made of players in the form of ads, and the amount of repeated stacking and spreading out throughout the fight made it extremely difficult. Graphically, it still stands as one of the best looking fights to this day, and I would highly recommend watching old kill videos like Blood Legions and SK Gaming's world first kill of it, as it's an extremely entertaining fight to watch. As difficult and amazing as this raid is, it still isn't the highest Burning Crusade raid on this list, however, and I'm sure all of you know which BC raid is Burning Tire. At number 4 is the raid that I'm sure most people are going to disagree with me on. It has only 5 bosses, takes place in one room, and has absolutely no trash. That's right, it's Trial of the Grand Crusader. This raid was one of the few filler raids in the game, as it just gave Blizzard more time to finish and polish up ICC after Awar had been out for so long. The first 4 bosses were all just placements, so that Blizzard could bring back a new Barak into the game after the crappy ending they gave Menasdril and Narub. The Beast of Northrend fight was just a big tard check, Jaraxxus was a simple tank and spank, and the faction champions were one of the worst bosses ever put in the game. The Twin Valks was actually a very good boss that let players do huge numbers on the meters if they could dodge the wrong orbs and keep the right buff on them at the whole time. Then the Lich King comes out, breaks the floor, and brings you to a new Barak. The new Barak encounter was actually very challenging, with difficult kiting of the boss needed during the second phase and insane tank damage being done in the third phase. So why exactly is this raid ranked above raids like the Black Temple and Sanwal Plateau? Well, if there's one thing I hate more than any other thing in this game, it's trash, and this raid had absolutely no trash. God, I just wish every raid was like that. Also, this raid tier was the time that I made the switch from being a casual Nax 25 raider into the more semi-hardcore elitist that I am today. As this list was my own opinion, like I said at the start of the video, I just had to put it up towards the top. Now that we're into the top 3 is where we're going to see the typical 3 raids everyone says are the best. However, my top 3 will probably differ from quite a few people, as I have Karazhan at the number 3 spot. Most people will say this raid was the best ever, however I really have to disagree. I will admit, the stars aligned for Blizzard on this raid and they knocked it out of the park. In a world of 40-man raiding, there were a lot of cliques and groups of friends joining guilds and raid groups of people they didn't really like, but otherwise they couldn't raid as you had to have 40 people. But then in BC, they came out with the first ever 10-man raid in Karazhan, and it allowed groups of people to just raid with their own friends, and the raid was actually insanely fun along with it. It had fights like the chess event, which was a classic, and the opera event, which would be based on children's stories like Little Red Riding Hood and the Big Bad Wolf. For most people, Karazhan was the first raid they'd ever been to, and it left a great first impression. However, the reason that I have it at number 3 for me is because it lacks that one big definitive boss. While all the bosses in Karazhan were memorable, sure, none of them were that challenging, even Prince Malakazar. Every other raid on this list has that one big epic end boss like Archimonde, Kil'jaeden, Illidan Stormrage, or even Ragnaros, but Karazhan just didn't have that. None of the bosses were really that bad, but none of them were that cool either. For me, the reason I play this game is to raid, and a raid that doesn't have that single epic boss that will live throughout WoW's lifespan is kinda just a letdown for me. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Karazhan was bad. Karazhan was absolutely great, but the 2 raids ahead of it just happened to be greater is all. The number 2 spot brings us Old Awar, and Old Awar brought with it the most changes to raiding that any single raid ever did. This was the first raid to have multiple difficulties with hard modes. Hard modes were in my opinion the best form of heroics in raiding, but it was never done in any other raid. Instead of simply turning on heroic by clicking your portrait, you had to do certain things inside the raid in order to make the bosses harder. On XT, you had to kill the exposed heart fast enough and the boss would heal to full and her abilities would be amplified, and then the heroic fight would start. On Thorum, you had to engage the boss within 3 minutes to keep Sif in the fight to make it harder. Plenty of bosses in the raid had these mechanics, and it was a far more interesting way to engage the raid. After completing Thorum, Freya, Hodor, and Memoron all on hard mode, you're finally able to engage Algalon. Algalon was Blizzard's big sell for Old Awar, a super secret heroic only boss that nobody knew anything about until Old Awar launched, only that it was going to be the greatest boss ever in the history of WoW, just like Blizzard promised. In terms of boss rooms, this boss certainly has one of the best. However, the fight itself was not that difficult and was really a disappointment to Old Awar. Only being able to be pulled for 1 hour per raid lockout, they obviously couldn't make it that difficult, or even the top guilds would take months to kill it. Although Algalon was always doomed to fail either way, because the boss right before it was the second best boss in the entire Lich King expansion, Memoron Hard Mode. The 3 hard mode bosses before it were not that difficult, but Memoron was different. Aptly named Firefighter, simply push the button labeled "Do Not Press This Button" and the hard mode encounter would start. A 10-minute self-destruct sequence was initiated and you began an amazing fight with fire, big giant robots, cheesy Blizzard humor, and a fight that was more difficult than Algalon ever was. With every boss, including Algalon dead, you can now turn your attention to the actual end boss, Yogg-Saron. The second old boss god in WoW, the pre-nerf Yogg fight was one of the top 5 most difficult bosses of all time, as it was thought to be mathematically impossible to kill until the guild stars killed it with some very clever kiting methods in Phase 3. Overall, Old Awar has left a lasting legacy on World of Warcraft since the day it was released, and there's barely anything wrong with it. However, the raid above it does take the prize for being the only completely flawless raid ever released in WoW.
We all know what it is, so I'll just say it. Icecrown Citadel. From day 1 of the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, we all knew that the expansion would end at ICC with the killing of the Lich King on the Frozen Throne. Expectations were high, and people did not want a disappointing end to their WoW's poster child, Arthas. Having been the star of Warcraft 3 in its expansion pack, the Lich King was a lot of people's reasons for having ever bought WoW in the first place. The story of the Lich King is epic, with him being a classic tragic hero and the fact that every evil deed he did on his way to becoming a corrupted Death Knight was done in order to save his people. So many of the big names in WoW were made because of the Lich King. Jaina Proudmoore, Lady Sylvanas, Martin Bronzebeard, and Tyrion Forgery. He had fights in Warcraft lore with all the biggest names like Illidan Stormrage, Kil'Thas Sunstrider, to name a few. Lich King was WoW's main character. He was the reason that WoW was at its absolute high in subscribers while ICC was out, and he was the reason that I personally got into raiding and really played this game at a serious level today. But on to the raid itself. Blizzard had a long time to work on and polish this raid after TOC came out, and it was time well spent. Almost every single boss, not including Rotface and Festergut, felt really unique. Even though Lord Margar was super easy, it was still one of the coolest character models in the entire game, so it felt really cool. Lady Deathwhisper and Deathbringer Sarfang were extremely challenging pre-nerf, even for the top guilds. We won't talk about the gunship fight, the loot ship fight. Once you reached the Upper Citadel, you had 3 corridors with 3 different themes. The Plague Corridor had the 2 easiest bosses and the most difficult boss in the entire Upper Citadel, with the 2 abominations I mentioned before, and Professor Putricide, who is based off Professor Farnsworth from Futurama. The Blood Council and Blood Queen Lanethel were both difficult bosses in their own Blood Corridor, and the Frost Corridor had a very weird boss called Dreamwalker. On this boss, the healers were actually DPS, and the DPS were, well, still DPS. Don't ask me how that one works, it's the one boss in this raid that's not very good. After her, you had Sindragosa, which in my opinion was the best dragon fight ever in WoW, and was also my first truly epic feeling while raiding when she died. Just so happened that the next epic feeling I would have would come with the next boss, the Lich King himself. I mentioned earlier how Metamorphosis is still in the game today based off of Illidan. Well, the Lich King has Asphyxiate, Defile, Necrotic Plague, and Remorseless Winter all carried on throughout the years by Death Knights, as well as his signature blade Frostmourne being picked up again and wielded by Frost DKs and Legion. The fight itself is by far the most iconic fight in WoW, with a legendary couple of minutes of RP at the end that would make any WoW nerd like myself wet their pants when it first happens. ICC will live on forever in World of Warcraft and will be remembered by the people who played it when it was current for years to come, as WoW has never been quite as good as it once was during and before ICC. So that concludes this list of the top 10 raids in World of Warcraft, and I just want to say thank you guys for sticking around through my first video on this channel. Once again, I'd like to ask you to please like, subscribe, and share this video so that I can bring you more top 10 videos just like this one. Alright, thanks guys for joining me. My name is Jacob with Tunnel Vision Gaming, and I'll see you in the next video.